guys. Hey guys, welcome back to another video. So I created this channel, you guys probably know, not supposed to be focused on photography. It was mainly supposed to be focused on lifestyle, but I'm probably going to be adding photography to the channel because a lot of people DM me on my Instagram asking questions about photography, asking questions about beginner photography, and asking questions about cameras, how cameras work, the settings, and editing, like contrast, exposure, all that kind of stuff. So in this channel, we're gonna try to go as deeper as possible. I'm gonna try to break down every little aspect into photography. Of course, I'm not like a master, a professional, like photographer. I don't been doing this for like a really long time. I've been doing this for like a year or two. The only reason why I learned so fast is because I studied art. I studied art in the past before I got into photography. Art taught me composition. Art taught me exposure. Art taught me the other stuff that every photographer should know. So before I got into photography, I learned all this other stuff when I was doing art. The only thing that it took me a little while to understand was the cameras, is the key, how the things work, the lens, ISO, shutter speed, all the stuff, and all the other little stuff, the settings. It's basically understand how the camera works, and because everything else I was studying on art. That's why it was so easy for me to move into photography. If you're out there and you study art and you know all the terms they use in art, it's gonna be very easy for you to understand how photography works. And in this video, I'm going to teach you guys the exposure triangle. The exposure triangle is one thing that every photographer should know. It's like basics of the basics. If you don't know the exposure triangle, your photo is probably not going to look really good. It's probably going to be overexposed or underexposed. So here we are. Let's start. I'm going to do a top down on the overhead camera right now. I'm going to switch to overhead. So I want to try it out, the exposure triangle, so you guys can understand how the exposure triangle works. And I'm going to try to explain best that I can. If you have any question, please DM me on my Instagram if you have any question. And here we go. Let's change the overhead camera. Alright, so hope you guys can hear me. So try to write down somewhere. Maybe take notes, because this is very important, guys. So the exposure triangle is literally a triangle. So I'm gonna draw it down. The exposure triangle is made out of the aperture. I'm gonna write on AP here. And the shutter speed. Let me try. SS for shutter speed. And ISO. Right now. Let's put ISO in here. Oh, I'm sorry, I got out of the frame a little bit. Let me try to use a pen, cause this. Hope the pen works. So okay. So first, let's understand aperture. The thing with aperture, the aperture is basically the depth of field. The wider your aperture, the more shallow your depth of field is gonna be. For example, if you're taking a photo with your aperture is also the F that you're probably gonna see on the camera. So right now, I'm shooting this video and my aperture is at 3.5. Your aperture can be based on the lens. Every lens have like your own, not your own specific aperture, but it has different. Some lenses can go a very high aperture, and some lenses can go to like a very low aperture. It depends on the lens also. Um, your aperture is creates that shallow, the depth of field we call. Um, the wider is your aperture, the the more shallow your depth of field is gonna be. So your lens, if you look through the lens, it has like a spiral kind of thing which close and open. That's that's how the aperture works. That part of the lens let more lights come in. So the wider is or how much is open, the more light's gonna be. It's more bright your video or your picture is gonna be. And taking consideration of the shallow depth of field. So if you're taking a photo on like f16 or f11, your background, you're gonna see a lot of the background. The background is gonna be really on the picture. Um, and if you're taking a photo and it's like 1.4 or 2, your background is gonna be kind of blurry. If you know what I mean. So the background is gonna be kind of blurry, and your subject in the photo is gonna pop more. And I know some people that only use um like 1.4 or 2 in the aperture, so they get like the blurry background. But you don't want to overuse. You want to you depends on the setting. You don't want to overuse. Let's say you're taking a photo and you want to tell a story. And if you're taking a photo in New York and your aperture is like f11 or f8, everyone else that look at the picture is gonna see the background, and they see in the background, they're gonna get the that you are in New York, that you're taking a photo in New York. Except if your aperture is like a f1.4, the background is gonna be very blurry. So you're only gonna see your subject. You're not gonna see the background. So it keeps away from telling a story, which is like one of the main points, like what we actually use photography to tell a story. So don't overuse like f1.4, f2. Um, be wise like while you're using your aperture. So I'm gonna write down so the brightness. So the more open your aperture is, the more light's gonna come in. So I'm gonna write down this arrow inside is for brightness. See, going down, and your aperture. I'm gonna write down f um 1.4 because a lot of lens a lot of lens goes to 1.4. The lens I'm using right now only goes to 3.5, so it depends on the lens. So in here I'm gonna write down f16 so you guys can see that the small, literally, like if you think about it, the smaller the number gets. And I'm gonna try to zoom it in a little bit more. Okay, so the smaller the number on the f-stops get, that means the more shallow or the depth of, like, the more shallow the depth of field is going to be. And if the higher is the number, the deep depth of field is going to be. You're also thinking about, if you like, what are you taking photos of? If you want to show a lot and you don't want to like just take a picture of one subject, like if you take a picture of a landscape, you should use maybe f16 because you want to show the more details as possible. You know, like if you take a picture of a person, you can use like 1.4 or 2. It's really good to use 1.4 maybe at night. If you take a night photography, that's really gonna help. That's really gonna help because a lot of light is gonna come in, and we don't have to use compensate on the shutter speed or the ISO. I hope you guys understood that. If you didn't, please DM me on my Instagram. Um, Shutter speed. So the shutter speed is kind of the the shutter speed is how fast, basically how fast your sensor open and close. So the slower your shutter speed, the more light's gonna come in, and the more blurry your picture is gonna be. So I'm gonna draw here going up. So if your shutter speed is like a 1/8, a lot of light is gonna come in. So if you take a picture at night, you probably want to keep your shutter speed maybe a 1/8 or maybe a 1, like 1 minute. And I gotta write down, I'm gonna draw another arrow. And here's 1/1000. Because usually some cameras of course go over that. But we're just gonna use that number in those range so you guys can understand better. Your shutter speed. The thing with shutter speed is how much motion blur adds to the picture. So if you're taking a picture of like a studio photo that the subject is not moving at all, just like posing, of course you can use like 1/15 or 1/30 because the subject is not moving a lot. And however, if you're taking a picture of a subject like running like a car, if you're taking a picture of a car like racing and you want to stop that motion, of course you have to use a higher shutter speed. Because if you don't use a higher shutter speed, 1/1000 or more, and your subject is gonna be very blurry, so it's gonna look like, like you see in cartoons, like the blurry. You don't actually see the subject. You're gonna see it, but not as clear. It also, if you're using, let's say you're using a shutter speed 1/8 or 1 second or 2 seconds, you have to kind of use a tripod. The reason why you have to use a tripod is because when your shutter speed is very slow, usually we shake our hands. It's a small shake. The movement of pressing the button kind of moves the camera a little bit, and it came like blurry. So what I do when I take in a photo that my shutter speed is very slow, I set a timer, so I click it in, and the camera waits like 5 seconds to take the shot, so it doesn't. So my hand of clicking the button doesn't affect the shot. You have to understand also that the shutter speed, the more open the shutter speed is, the longer the shutter speed is open for, the more light is going to come in. Imagine if you, how am I going to explain this? Imagine like it's a sink. Let's think about that. A sink, when you open the sink, the longer the sink is open, the more water is going to come in. Which is like, thinking about the water will be light. So that's why this is the arrow going up. That's for brighter, so every arrow in here inside is for brightness. And you can see the slower the shutter, the more light is gonna come in. So the longer it's gonna take for the sensor to open and close. So a lot of light is gonna come in. You should use more a slow shutter speed when you are low light. If you're taking photos at low light or maybe night photography, you want to take in consideration of using a slow shutter speed. And yeah, take consideration using a slow shutter speed. But think about what are you shooting. That matters too. For the fact that if you're taking a photo of a car at night and the car is in motion, you definitely don't want to use a longer shutter speed because the car is going to be blurry and nobody's going to see the car. So shutter speed, I think I should also try to use more motion. So I'm going to add here more motion, blur. Okay, and the faster the shutter speed is, the less motion, blur. Hope you guys can see. And I'm gonna also write down here for the aperture. So f16 is gonna be a deep depth. So deep depth of field. And the more open, so at 1.4 will be a shallow depth of field. So write down shallow depth of field. Now, ISO. The ISO is a lot of people. A lot of people are confused, like when and how to use the ISO at the beginning, and I also got confused too. And this is something you guys have to really pay attention. So the ISO is basically the sensitivity, the sensor sensitivity to the light. That's inside the camera. The camera is kind of creating more light on the photo. Um, Different from the aperture and the shutter speed, because the aperture and the shutter speed is usually on the lens, and that's how much the lens respond to the photography, and the ISO is based on the camera body. So I'm going to draw an arrow going that direction for brightness. Because let's say I'm going to write down 100 to I don't know, 10,000. Some cameras definitely go beyond that, but let's use that range for now. So the ISO is kind of compensating all the aperture and the shutter speed. If you're taking a picture on extremely low light, if you're like doing a night photography and you have little light coming in, you probably want to use the ISO. You gotta compensate on the ISO. Example right now I'm shooting this video on 800 ISO. It's a very low ISO, but because I have my window right there and I have the light in the I have my key light here. The ISO, you have to be careful and you have to know your camera when you're using the ISO. The reason of that, when you use too much ISO, your photo start getting grainy, really grainy. I remember once I shot a picture in New York. I don't know if I have the picture. If I do, I'm gonna show it here. And it was the night. That's when I started, and I used my ISO very high, and the picture was so grainy, that I couldn't use it. So we call that grainy noise. We call that noise, or photo noise. That's when you edit your photos, you're probably gonna see color noise or photo noise. That's what they refer to. It's like look like it's sand on your lens, basically. So the smaller is your ISO, is gonna add less noise to the picture. I'm gonna write down here less noise. And the higher is more noise. So I'm gonna add more noise. Is adding more noise to the picture. So there are people, like, I know people that use their photography and use the higher ISO for a reason. They want to have that old look, maybe that vintage look. Some photography actually use the high ISO to add grain to the picture, so when you're taking the picture, it gets like a little vintage look to the picture. I don't like to use a high ISO for the fact that my Lightroom that I use already has I can't add grain lately, like later to the picture on the post process. so I don't have to bother too much on having high ISO, because I just know that I can add the grain on the post process of the picture. So yeah, so the higher the ISO, the higher the brightness. So in the range of 100 into 10,000, a 10,000 is gonna be a lot of light coming in, but it's also gonna be a lot of noise. However, it depends on the body of the camera that you're using, right? So it also depends a lot on the camera that you're using. For example, I shot most of my pictures on the M50, the Canon M50. The Canon M50, when you start reaching the 1,000 or higher than that, the picture started getting really grainy, so it's extremely hard to use. Other cameras like the new Canon R5 or Canon R6 are very responsive to low light photography. So it goes higher than that. You can actually go with a higher ISO without affecting the picture as much. So that depends on the camera. Sony, I know Sony is. I got friends that use Sony to shoot concerts, because usually concerts is inside and very low light, because they know that the camera they use is very good to use a low light, and is very good to use on a high ISO. So here it is, the exposure triangle. The exposure triangle is made of aperture, your shutter speed, and your sensor sensitivity, or your ISO. Most people are gonna call ISO. And so back the review. So aperture, the more open, so at 1.4 would be a shallow depth of field, and the more close would be a deep depth of field, or f16 or higher than that. For the shutter speed, the slower the shutter speed, the more motion blur is gonna add to the picture. So like a 1/8 or a 1-2 seconds, it's gonna be a lot of motion. And the faster, so it's gonna be less motion blur. And for the ISO, the smaller the ISO of like 100 or 200 is gonna be almost no noise, and then the higher ISO is gonna be a lot of noise. So this is the exposure triangle. I hope you guys learned something, and if you have any question, please follow me on Instagram and DM me, and I'm gonna be so happy to answer. I'm gonna change to the side view. So that's it, guys. So I hope you guys learned something, and if you have more questions, please DM me on my Instagram. That's the platform that I use the most. Don't forget to like this video. It helps a ton. Like, it helps a ton. And subscribe is gonna also help me. Follow me on Instagram. I'm gonna leave the links down below. I mainly post my photography on Pinterest. It usually goes first on Pinterest and then goes to Instagram. But yeah, so if you want to check my Pinterest too, or if you want to check Instagram, it's fine. And thanks for watching. That really helped. I'm gonna leave all the links for all my social media down below. So click it in, follow in, support my work, and I see you on next video.